Greetings, I am Mr. O'Neill, and I teach 8th grade English Language Arts online for Stride K12, and I also coach chess and a few other esports for Stride K12. We'll take a look at the Week 4 regular season for the K12 Esports League Chess Club, of which we have almost 100 members now, which is great. And we'll go to club events. And the Week 4 winter season just wrapped up. M. Bilal1238, first place with 45 points. Congratulations to I Rookrolled you, always in the tops of the standings, the best player in the K12 Esports League over the years. And then all the usual suspects: Dr. EvaMan12, no slouch, 1945, chess.com elo, Budgie10, over 1800, chess.com elo, a piggy bank 1391, Dream Angels 88, Kaizamar, relatively new but been playing very well recently. Paper Player 59, another usual suspect, number 8 for Week 4. V Renter 737, relatively new on the scene. And then Tiger 2 Sharp, we've seen them before, 1006, chess.com elo, rounding out the top 10. And congratulations to all the players who participated in Week 4. And if you go to page 2, we have a total of 46 players who participated in the Week 4 regular season. And everyone earned at least 1 point, which is awesome. Which means everyone got at least a draw. Nobody had 0 points, which is awesome. Congratulations to everyone who participated. And we'll take a look at our first game between Budgie 10 and Tiger 2 Sharp. And we have a Queen's opening. And then Budgie 10 is looking to castle kingside for a King's Indian. And the engine is saying that black is playing the Per Zeparia variation. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then developing the bishop to b2. Pretty logical. Taking control of the center. And white is slightly for choice here. Immediately challenging the center. And this is playable, according to the engine. And takes. Queen's off the board. And then you probably want to take with the rook in this case, although the engine does like taking with the knight, because the idea is, I mean, once your knight is off of c6, then you can have an easier time developing these pawns, because this knight is blockading your c7 pawn. But if it was me, I probably would have taken with the rook. And if you take with the rook, it's still playable. So, but there is this double attack here on the pawn, so the pawn's going down. And but we have take with the knight, and then takes anyway, because once the knight moves, you still only have one defender, because the knight moved. And then challenging the knight on e5, defending the knight, which is logical, but the engine doesn't really like this move, because now you're exposing your king on these dark squares. So, and just the king is generally less safer in this position. And we have an exchange. Yeah, so you got to be careful, because this pawn was not being defended, and the engine really likes taking it, which is what happens in the game. And the rooks are on good squares because they're on semi-open files. Well, the d file is an open file once the bishop moves. And then the e file is semi-open because of this e2 pawn. So the knight develops, and yeah, so the whole point of putting the knight on b3 was so that the knight could redevelop to c2. So you can develop your knight in this diagonal fashion in one move, or 2 moves rather. So, and then the bishop is eyeing a8. So we have an exchange. You got to be careful. Those long diagonals can be hard to spot sometimes. And going after the undefended bishop. Yeah, rook to d7 makes sense because you're attacking the undefended rook, and then you're also getting ready to double up. So the engine actually likes king to f2, but if it was me playing, I like to look for rook infiltrations. So this counts as rook infiltration, and it's still a very strong move, even though it's not the top engine move. And the rook has to move somewhere, and then you can maybe keep an eye on this knight, so the bishop can't redevelop to b7 because then you're losing your knight. And then like that, let's say you get some tempo on the bishop, you're just going to slide back, and then maybe harass the rook again. But you can just slide back, and then eventually you're going to be ready to double up on d1 eventually. So I mean, black's going to try to harass this way, but you can always take and then takes, and then this pawn is getting ready to eventually put some pressure and promote. So they didn't go down that line, but what happened in the game was pushing the e-pawn. Still logical. Going after the knight, and then the c5 pawn's not being defended, so going after that. Defend, so move the bishop back, and the bishop's not being defended there, obviously. So, oh, they took the pawn instead. But yeah, you can just take the undefended bishop there. And yeah, that's 2 moves in a row. Oh, I guess the bishop was being defended by the knight there. Never mind. Okay, now they're going after the undefended bishop with that rook infiltration. And then they resign. Because, I mean, white's completely winning here. It's +5 in favor of budgie 10, so +5 is the equivalent of a full rook. And we'll look at the next game. Good game from Tiger2 Sharp, though. They played well. So we have budgie 10 and Kaismar's rated 788 chess.com elo. Budgie 10's over 1800. And right off the bat, we have a queen's opening from both sides. Copycat variation. Almost have a 4 knights. And Indian game knights variation is what the engine is saying. And then c5 to challenge the center pawn on d4, which they are happy to exchange. And you can see black already has the advantage in the center. So because black has the advantage of the center, I believe that's the reason why the engine slightly prefers black for choice here. And castle queenside for white. And immediately going after the undefended. Well, the a2 pawn is being defended by the knight, but you'll see that we have a double attack now on the a2 pawn. So white has to do something about that double attack. And offering an exchange of queens, takes, and takes, and here white is slightly winning. But if you looked at that other variation, it's a little tricky because after you take the queen, you're going after they choose to go after the knight here, and then you're threatening to take the knight this way with the pawn. And then it also, if you take the knight with the pawn, then you're exposing your king on this c file. So the rooks are going to come over and double up and have a battery on the c file eventually. And that rook battery on the c file is pretty dangerous for white. So what they're saying here is that if you just assume that you're going to lose your knight anyway, you can just take the pawn with check, and then the king has to move, and then you can jump in with your knight this way, And then if you take, the point is there. It's weird because Kaismar is winning by 2 points here, but it's not so simple because you've got this threat to deal with. So white can't stop all the threats. So like the rook's going to go here to keep an eye on this, and then you're also threatening this. So black is going to win some material back here no matter what, because you've got the fork coming with the rooks, and it's just not looking so good. So for example, let's say white tries to get out of the fork by going like this, then you still take to go after this rook instead, and then the problem is there's only so many places you can move this rook. So like if you go to d2, then the rook's just going to get harassed. You know, the engine says rook here, but the problem is you've got this, and the knight is trapped. So you're going to lose your knight back because the knight is trapped. So you're going to have to sacrifice your knight back somehow, either taking this pawn, this pawn, this pawn. So black's going to win some material back. And then black is minus 1.5 in their favor here. So if you go back to the original line, in the game what happens is takes, 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 and black can't retake here because this bishop was not being defended. So since black can't retake, then black is down by 2 points here. So that's a free rook, and now white is winning by 7 points. There is a fork, but even with the fork, white is still winning. Going after the bishop, bishop has to move back. You still have the fork for black. Developing the knight, takes, takes. Black wins back some material, but white is still winning by 4 points here, which is the equivalent of a minor piece and a pawn. Defending the pawn, attacking the bishop. That is a pin. That's a pin fork. So this bishop is being pinned against this bishop, and then the rook is also forking these bishops, so a pork, essentially. And the way that white handles this is just by going after the other bishop. And they move out of the way. Takes, takes, takes. And after that exchange, white had to sacrifice a minor piece back for a pawn. So now white's only winning by 1 point. And Budgie 10 has really made a strong comeback. And there goes an undefended pawn. Now the rook or the knight is trapped in this position, so you got to be careful. And the point is that it's not quite trapped all the way, because if you try to go here to go after the knight can always go back. So the king has to come into the game to go after the knight, really, because if this rook moves to a5, then the knight will have an escape square. So now the rook is activated on the G file. And that is a pin, pinning the king against this pawn. And it's a race to see who can promote to a queen the fastest. And white's pawn is just much faster than black's pawns here. Yeah, you're going to sacrifice the knight, which is smart. And then white has a queen and it's game over. That's a pin, pinning the pawn against the king. Smart. That's a fork, forking the king and the rook. Although you could have taken the rook there, but all roads lead to Rome. And then it's checkmate shortly afterward. They eventually get another queen and get checkmate. So a really strong game from Kaismar. Upsets Budgie 10. But even though Budgie 10 was upset by Kaismar, Budgie 10 is still an extremely strong player, over 1800 chess.com elo, so nothing to be ashamed about. And Budgie 10's actually beaten me twice. And I don't have any draws or wins against Budgie 10. So Budgie 10's a really strong player. And we'll go on to the next game. We have Kaismar again, but this time playing against Dr. Evaman 12, who is 1945 chess.com elo, even stronger than Budgie 10. And Kaismar has the white pieces. We immediately have a Scandinavian, or not Scandinavian, England gambit, I meant to say, from black. And the issue is that, yeah, you're black wants to give a check here, and then you're going to bring the bishop back, so because you don't want to lose your bishop because the bishop's not being defended, but then you're going to end up losing this pawn. So, but it's not quite so simple because, like, now you're just losing your bishop. But like, let's say you bring your bishop back, and then white can take, or black can take the pawn here, and then you're trying to set up a queen trap. So it's not quite a queen trap because black can take, and then, or excuse me, not take. I forgot the knight was there. Black can go back, and normally you would want to put your knight here on b5 because you're thinking, okay, I can go after the queen and go after this at the same time. But we saw this in week 1 or week 2. The correct move is actually this. So b5 looks strong because you're going after the queen with the knight, and you're also going after this at the same time. But the engine actually prefers d5 here. So the point of d5 is, instead of going after the queen and c7, you're going after the bishop in c7. So you just move the bishop back, and then you can go after the bishop again, and like you would have like takes, and the queen can't really come back to defend this c7 square because the rook, right? So the engine wants the king to just slide over to d8 to protect against the fork, because that's the threat, right? Is the fork. So, like, I mean, you could also potentially try this to go after the rook, but then you're just going to get forked anyway because the knight's going to defend the rook from behind. So it doesn't really work. So what ends up happening in the game is they did not move their bishop back to d2 to defend against the check, and they just lost their bishop because the bishop wasn't being defended. And then hopping the knight into the game, also threatening this fork. And then takes. They get the rook. And it's difficult to get the knight out safely in this position. So you're winning by 4 points. But if you can't get the knight out safely, then you're really only winning by 1 point. So takes. And now you're only winning by 3 points instead of 4 points because you lost a pawn on that exchange. And then your b2 pawn is also under attack. And black does not see that the b2 pawn's under attack. So yeah, so the point is that if I mean, it makes sense to go e3 on some level because you want to activate your bishop and get castled, but you have to deal with this threat. And if you take the pawn on b2, then that's black's winning by over a point there, according to the engine. Even though white's winning by 2 points, the engine evaluation is like almost, over 1 for black. Even though white's winning by 2, it's over 1 in favor of black. So, and what happens in the game is takes, going after the knight. So you have to sacrifice back because you were not able to get the knight out safely, and then after the exchange, you're only winning by 1 point. And it's not looking so great. I mean, white does have 2 rooks to black's only 1 rook, but black has a bishop and a knight in exchange for the rook. So 2 minor pieces together are usually going to be more powerful than a rook, because a bishop and a knight is 3 points and a rook is 5 points. So in theory, this should be a win for Dr. Evenman12, even though Kaismar is winning by a point. Now, that's the only move to save checkmate. And now Kaismar can win the rook. And this is completely winning for Kaismar. But the queen is a little bit trapped here. Queen is still trapped on h8. Queen is still trapped on h8. Cannot take the g7 pawn because the knight's defending. Yeah, so the issue is that the bishop and the queen are working together for the battery. And that's checkmate. So Kaismar was completely winning just a few moves ago, but when your queen is trapped, it's as if you don't have a queen. So Kaismar was winning by 6 points, but it was really more like they were losing by 3 points or more because their queen was trapped. So when your queen's trapped, you basically don't have a queen. And really good game from Dr. Evenman12 to come back and get the win, even though they were down by so much material. Really smart. Congratulations. We'll take a look at the next game. We have I Rook Rolled You and Dr. Evenman12. I Rook Rolled You is still over 2100. And these are the 2 best players in the K12 Esports League. Budgie 10's not far behind since they're over 1800. And I Rook Rolled You decides to start with a King's opening this time. King's opening from both sides. Roy Lopez and Berlin defense. The pawn was not being defended, but I Rook Rolled You is not too concerned about that because it helps to open up the center. And I Rook Rolled You knows they know what they're doing since they're over 2100. And takes, you're going to win back the pawn. Takes, you're losing a bishop, but the engine still says it's even here. Even though I Rook Rolled You is down by 3 points, it's still an even position because the knight doesn't have anywhere to go. So the knight obviously can't go back to those because there's pawns, can't go here because then the knight's being lost to the pawn. I mean, like if you did put the knight here, then you've got takes. Oh, I guess the engine likes bishop to g5 check, or not check, but going after the queen. But the point is that like if you tried to block this way, then you've got takes, takes, and you can't take back because the queen's defending, so you gotta check this way. But they didn't go into that line. So here, there's a double attack on d4. So I rook rolled you's going to take advantage of the double attack and get his minor piece back. Takes, takes, takes. Now it's back to an even game again. And we have en passant, which makes sense, because then you're opening up the e file. You want to get this rook over to e1 and give a check eventually. And you could give a check right away with the rook, but instead they give a check with the queen and block with the queen. Slide the queen over. Do not want to exchange queens at this point, because now the threat is eventually you would like to get the rook on e1 to have this nice pin against the king, but you can't put your rook on e1 immediately because these rooks are not connected and the rook is undefended on e1, so the queen would just be able to take the rook with checkmate. So your chance to put the rook on e1 was in this position. So check, but then the point is that black can easily block with the bishop, and you don't want to sacrifice the rook for the bishop here. So and your queen's also not being defended, so you got to do something about this undefended queen, and it's a theoretical draw from this position, even though they're still in the middle game. And what happened in the game was takes, and then they just went back and forth for a threefold repetition. So draw. And this is a legitimate draw. And no concerns here. So good game from both players. And I rook rolled you also played against Dead Zone 222. Chess.com Elo 1626. They are no slouch, and they know what they're doing. And they've been playing chess for a while when you're at 1626. So I rook rolled you immediately goes for some kind of scholar's mate, it looks like. And Dead Zone 222 just develops normally. And because of the regular development from Dead Zone 222, then I rook rolled you just decides to put the queen back on d1. And we just have some more normal developing moves. And it looks like I rook rolled you wants to castle queenside, since they've committed f3 so early in the game, only on move 7. And we have takes, takes. It looks like white has ruined their pawn structure because they have doubled pawns on the c file. But if you analyze it a little bit, it's actually not so bad, because even though this pawn is being undefended at the moment, it's helping to clamp down on d5. You want to clamp down on these central squares as much as you can, especially in the early game and middle game. And then it's also going to open up your rook, because when you castle queenside, your rook on the d file is going to have a little bit more oomph. And going after the undefended pawn right away, it makes sense to take the knight here, because you don't really want to exchange knights, because you want your rook to be on the semi-open file. So like if they would have exchanged knights, then you would have had to either take with the queen or take with the pawns. And if you're taking with the pawns, then you're closing down the d file. So you want to keep the d file semi-open if you can. So it makes sense to exchange the bishop for the knight there. And then now black has doubled pawns. I mean, your rook can slide over and get to a semi-open file, but doubled pawns isn't great. And then this bishop really is the saddest bishop in the world. This bishop does not have a bright future. Stuck on e7, just staring at two pawns and not looking at any squares in the middle of the board at all. Is just defending a couple of pawns. So sad, sad bishop. And queen to d2, getting ready to castle either side, but castle and queen side would be best. Although there is a royal fork, which, ooh, they missed the royal fork. I rickrolled you, missed a royal fork. So take on c7, that's check, and you're hitting the queen. That's pretty unusual for I rickrolled you to miss a royal fork like that. So, and they spent 30 seconds on this position. Wow, they spent 30 seconds. They spent 30 seconds on the position, and they still didn't see the royal fork. That's pretty unusual. Castle queenside, hopping in with the knight, and you can see this queenside attack. So pretty smart for I rickrolled you to delay castling queenside, and when black committed to castling queenside, then it's like, okay, we'll just do a queenside pawn storm, and then we'll go after you that way. Smart to take the bishop there because the knights are defending each other, so you can't retake. Going after the undefended knight. So there are tactics here, according to the engine, because the point is after takes, then you've got this. The queen has a pin with the knight against the king, and then the knight can't move anywhere. So you sacrificed your knight, but it was only a temporary sacrifice because you're winning the knight back with this pin. And the pawn is going to take the knight here. So, and then when the pawn takes the knight, then you're also opening up this rook. The rook has a really nice file here on the A file. So, I mean, your knight here is being attacked, which is true. So, like, if you've got takes, and then taking with the queen with check, and then black has to move the king, and then, you know, the other rook is coming in, and this is almost +7 for white. So what happens in the game is going after the knight, takes, and then you take with the knight. You don't want to take with the pawn because the pawn wouldn't be defended on d5. You would just lose your pawn. And then your knight wasn't being defended on e7 either. So you have to take with the knight. So your knight can be defended. And then mate in 2 from here. So check. Oh, mate in 2. See if you can find it. I rickrolled, you didn't quite find it. It's check. And then you could move the king here, but then that's checkmate because the queen's coming in and the knight's defending the queen. And then the other way to do it would be just to go here. But then same thing, you've got the queen infiltrating to c7. It's just a checkmate in a slightly different way. And what happened in the game was check. Setting up a discovered check, which I rickrolled you takes advantage of. And then that's checkmate. So nice game from I rickrolled you to earn another win. And Dead Zone 222, nothing to be ashamed of. You're a strong player. 1626, you know what you're doing. Just keep up the good work. And good job on a strong showing. And we'll go to the last game. Admiral Aqua and Trocador the Lemur Jedi. Both of these players are over 700 chess.com elo. And we have a Queen's opening. The engine is saying Cole system, anti-Cole variation, which I'm not very familiar with. But this is a normal idea. Like, eventually you want to get your knight to b3, but then your knight could get kicked if the pawn pushes to c4. So, yeah, and then the other knight getting into e5 is natural, but then you've got knight to d7 or c6, either way, to challenge your knight on e5. And the point is that if you tried to challenge the knight by going here, then if you exchange, then you're taking with the b pawn, and then you've got another pawn closer to the center. It looks weird having doubled pawns on the c file, but I think it's actually playable if I remember correctly. So here, and then takes. And this is still playable, believe it or not, because even though you've got doubled pawns on the c file, you've got an extra pawn closer to the center, and then you also have the semi-open file to work with on the b file. So that's the point. So what happened in the game was challenging the center with c4, takes, challenging the knight on d4. Yeah, I would have taken the bishop. Yeah, the engine was saying take the bishop. That's probably what I would have done too. Because bishops are a little tiny bit stronger than knights in most positions, depending on the position, but they're both worth 3 points on the point system. But takes, you have to take back. Now you've got doubled pawns, and your pawn structure is not looking great. Take. Now you're defending the pawn, which is good, but your king's a little exposed. Castles, smart. Now the rook has X-ray vision on the queen. So this is always something you want to keep in mind when rooks have X-ray visions on queens like this. Better to take with the queen than the pawn there, because you don't want to ruin your pawn structure on the king side. Takes. Going after the queen right away, and it's smart because you don't want to, when you have these queen exchanges or potential exchanges, you don't want to lead with the queen. You know, you want the queen on the back side of the battery, not on the front side of the battery. So the queen has to move to safety. And then setting up a discovered attack. Takes. Discovered attack against the queen, but the queen can just retake the bishop, which is what happens in the game. And then that rook's not being defended. So the queen's just going to take the rook. And that's where Admiral Aqua lost. So other than that, it was a close game. Have to defend against checkmate. Takes. The Lemur Jedi's already winning by 5 points here, so it makes sense for them to exchange as much as possible. Takes. And now that the queens are off the board, now you're down to 1 rook versus 2. Trying to get this pawn to promote in vain. Now you can have a double attack on the pawn. And now you don't have any pieces left other than your pawns. And it's eventually checkmate from here. Elementary from this point. Eventually, the Lemur Jedi gets a queen and delivers checkmate. Good game from both players. And that'll wrap up week 4 of the regular season for the Stride K12 Esports League. And great games to everybody. And we'll talk to you later. Have a great day. Bye.